Thank you everyone for letting me come and share a little bit of two of my favorite topics, CourseMill and Lectora. What we're going to do today is to take a look at how and I'm going to share my screen here in just one moment. And we're going to take a look at how do you actually publish a Lectora course directly to CourseMill. So with that said, let me start by sharing my screen. And then we will take a look at a Lectora course and kind of walk through the process. I get a lot of questions on how do I get Lectora content into CourseMill. So I thought about it and I decided these were the three things that I wanted to share with you and enable you to do at the end of this session. So what we're going to cover is in true instructor fashion, at the conclusion of this presentation, you will be able to configure Lectora to publish directly to CourseMill. You'll be able to set up a CourseMill course. I call them course profiles. So you'll be able to set up a course that permits direct publishing from Lectora. And then you'll be able to initiate and publish a course from Lectora to CourseMill. And throughout the last couple of years, I get a lot of questions. There's a number of different ways, of different publishing options in Lectora. How do I know which is the best one? So we're going to take a look at what I think is the best one for CourseMill and Lectora users is just publish directly. Go from Lectora up to CourseMill. If you don't have CourseMill, there are still some options for you. And as an instructional designer, you often want to know, well, where is my course going? Is this a known LMS? And I'll show you that in our Lectora Online product, we actually have added the ability to publish to a number of different learning management systems. So, do I need to have an account on the LMS? Well, the answer to that is always yes, you do, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a student account. We're going to look at how in CourseMill you need instructor credentials in order to do this publishing. One of the greatest challenges that we often encounter are the protocols that you use for your course to communicate back and forth with an LMS. And they range, you have SCORM, you have XAPI, you have CMI5, you've got SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004. So you have a lot of different options. So we're going to take a look at a couple of those options. We're going to narrow it down to one for CourseMill, but just to make sure that we've got all the bases covered for you. One of the challenges, one of the questions that I often get is what has to be in a course before I publish? If you've ever gone to publish directly to an LMS or even to a zip file, you may find you get blue messages, you get red messages, and all of these things have to be reconciled before your course is actually ready for prime time. So we'll take a quick look at some of those more common messages and how to fix those. All right, so now that you've made the decision, where do I start? Do I start with Lectora or do I start with CourseMill? So we'll answer that question as we go. And if I do this once, is that good enough? And what we'll find is that you can do it once in Lectora to do the configuration, but there are things that you have to do on the LMS on a per course basis. So these are the questions that I'm hoping to answer as we progress through the next bit of time here. Okay, so let's start with CourseMill. First of all, you have to have an instructor account in an organization. An org in CourseMill is just a group. It's a collection of students and courses. And it's like a firewall. If you're inside of that org, you have access to those courses, and only those students can take those courses. So we'll take a quick look at that. You'll want to create a course profile. Now, I call it a course profile, but it's really you're defining a course record within the LMS. And in that record, you associate the course content, the timing, the enrollment requirements, and all of that. The content gets associated to that course profile. And when a student enrolls in the course, they are then given access to the content, but a copy of that profile is what is used to create the enrollment record and the completion record. And we also need to have an instructor account reference. So all of these things collectively, I'm just going to pop up a slide here because I'm building out the course that we're going to publish. And what we'll do now is we'll switch over to CourseMill. CourseMill is a learning management system. It's been used by groups and organizations for over the last 13 years. It's very powerful. It runs as a learning management system. You can treat it as an engine, and you can connect your learning platforms to it. So very, very exciting tool. What I've done is, first of all, I've selected one of the organizations that is a member of this particular platform, and I have defined a course profile for it. So let's just start with that. Every course must have a unique identifier. There it is. Every course requires a title. We have a couple of fields here where you can put information about the course. This can be used to present it in a catalog or an e-commerce system, or just to let the user know this is the purpose of the course, and I have that information before I enroll and consume the content. So that's the first thing that we have to do, is to create this. I've already created it, but it's very simple to do in CourseMill. You just simply click add a course. You give it a course ID. I'm using the conference as a kind of a code here. So this is our virtual conference for 2022, day 3. Okay, I've already created that one, so we'll call this day 3, session 3. And I fill in all of the appropriate information here, and all I have to do is save it, and I now have a course profile that's been created. So it's that easy to do, and I get a little click happy sometimes when I start talking. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that, and we'll work with this one that I've already created. Once you've created the course the course profile, you can do things such as determine who can be enrolled in the course, what type of course is it, web-based versus instructor-led, can I enroll myself, or do I require an administrator to enroll me? And we have a lot of other settings that we can focus on today, but we'll kind of skip over. We do have the ability to add some limitations to the course. This course expires in 90 days, or you have to retake it once a year. We're able to provide that kind of information. We can set up bulletin boards and forums and all of those kinds of things, but that's all about CourseMill. So what we really want to get to is this tab here called the Instructors tab. In order to publish directly from Lectora into a CourseMill course, we have to have an instructor who is assigned to the course. Right now I have Mrs. Twiggs, and this is actually kind of a memorial. Mrs. Twiggs was my 6th grade teacher, and for some reason over the years, I've always gravitated to using her as my example, both as an instructor as well as a demonstrator. So that's why she's here. And initially, this is sitting over in a list of all the instructors that have been set up on the system. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. Once they're set up and they appear in this list, I just identify who is the instructor. I move her over into the assigned column. And once she's there, then I simply click the save button, and Mrs. Twiggs is now associated with this course as the instructor. All right, so that's the basic setup on the CourseMill side. Let's jump in a little bit deeper here. We've talked about how to create the course profile. You fill out at a minimum the first tab called course, and then you add an instructor to the course. Now, the thing about instructors, let's go back to CourseMill. The thing about instructors is, let's go look for Mrs. Twiggs now, and she's in the JWE organization. And let me just, whoops, I get click happy sometimes, I apologize. Let me get over there. And then I'm going to be looking for Mrs. Twiggs. And there's a couple of things that you'll want to be aware of here. When you set up an instructor in CourseMill, you simply, on the user profile, you check this box called instructor. You can have, there are multiple levels of additional responsibilities that are associated to this user account. An instructor has the ability to enroll and manage and actually modify course content. Reporters, on the other hand, think of those as supervisors or managers. They are limited to enrolling their own reports. The folks that report to them, they can run reports on content and courses that have been used by people that report to them. They have a much more limited level of access. You can combine these two. All you really have to be, though, is an instructor in order to publish directly to CourseMill. Now, the reason I point this out is we do have a permissions tab. And these permissions give the user additional capabilities. The default instructor responsibilities include the abilities to do things like add courses, modify content, update the grade book, register somebody in a course. So it's not necessary to give them any of these privileges. When you start adding some of these other privileges or credentials in, you're actually extending their capability. All we need right now is simply a basic instructor role in order to do that. So Mrs. Twiggs was set up. She's been added to the course as having the ability to make those modifications. All right. So once we've set up the course, we can now start doing some of the fun stuff, and that's working with Lectora. What we have to do is there is a set of preferences that are associated to your application. Now, right now, you'll notice that I'm using the desktop. The same thing is true for Lectora Online. The display is going to be a little bit different, but the goal is the same, and most of the settings are also the same. So to get to the preferences for your Lectora profile, you simply go to the File tab and select Lectora Preferences. And in this dialog box, you'll see that there is a tab for CourseMill. And so what we have to do is we have to set up the host, the path once we're on the host, and we also provide our default instructor credentials. Right now I'm impersonating Mrs. Twiggs, so I'm using her credentials to make these changes and updates. So let's go on to momentarily, let me jump ahead and then we'll come back to this panel. There are really two fields that we have to submit. The first is the host field and the second is the path. So in order to determine what your host field is, simply look at the URL for your CourseMill site. And we're going to take the domain portion only. That's everything before the first slash. Obviously, the HTTPS / is part of that. We're looking for any of the subdomain data. We're going to ignore that for a moment. So all I have to do is to grab that information, and I provide that as in the host field. On desktop, that is Lectora desktop, you'll want to make sure that you use the full URL. That is including the HTTPS : / because we're going to be using the secure HTTPS protocol to talk to our CourseMill host. If you don't include that, sometimes it works, but more often than not, particularly if you're behind a firewall or you've got some rules associated with your Wi-Fi router, all of those things can get in the way. So make sure you include the full domain portion of the URL. The second piece that we have to provide is the path. And a lot of times you'll have kind of a vanity URL. And what I mean by that is it may, for example, you may come here and you share this site with multiple organizations, each with their own URL. So I may have something such as org1 as my identifier. But that's not going to be the case as we set up our profile. It is almost always /CM. Now, in my current installation here, when we look at my server, and let me just clear that out, you'll see that that is indeed the case. But it could be the name of your organization. It could be anything in there. We simply take the front end, the domain portion, we add that as the host, and then we add /CM as the path. That actually targets it to the right location on the server where your requests will be processed, okay? Lastly, you'll want to set up your default instructor credentials. By doing this, they're automatically populated into the publishing dialog, which we'll see here in a couple of minutes. You can override those during your publishing. So even though my default instructor credentials are Mrs. Twiggs, I may be publishing a course to another instructor's group of course elements. So you can override that when you get there. But this is the same user ID and the same password that you would use to sign into CourseMill as an instructor, okay? All right, now we get to the point in the conversation where, all right, well, let's actually do some publishing. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to go back to CourseMill for a moment and kind of set the stage. I've created a course. I'm sorry, I have created a user. Let's go back to the course. I've created a course. In that course, I've given it the information necessary to define the course sufficiently to allow people to be enrolled, to consume, and to be tracked during that entire process. I've set up an instructor who owns the course. What I haven't done is I haven't provided any content. So when I click on the content panel, you'll see there is no content there. If a course does have content, let's go back one level here. And I'll just really quick grab another course here just to show you. If I do have course content, what you'll see is you'll see a launch icon. You'll see an editor for managing the profile of the course content itself, and a delete button. Plus, you'll see the gradebook ID as it exists, as it's tracked through the system. So none of those are actually there currently for our current course. So I just want to prove, in spite of all this smoke and mirrors, I'm actually going to publish to CourseMill today. Okay, so once again, if I go and notice, I can click content here, or when I get click happy, I just right click and select content from the drop down, and I get right there and I see there is indeed no content. So the next thing is, let's go publish. Well, I have been using Lectora for a long time now. And I always come up here to the very top right-hand corner, I'm sorry, left-hand corner. My screen is being mirrored. I come up here to the top left-hand corner and I select the publishing options, and I'm presented with all of these different things that I can publish to. I discovered recently that there is also a publishing option over here on the right on the home ribbon. So you can go here and have access to the same publishing options. So I've shown both of you there, not because it's important, but because I keep finding more and more capability in Lectora, and I thought it would be useful to share that with you all. All right. So what I do is I'm simply going to come up here and I'm going to select the target for my publishing. You'll notice we published a review link. Many of you are familiar with review link. It's a tool that allows you to publish your content and allow your reviewers to interact with it in real time on the network and leave comments and suggestions and help you make your content the best that it can be. I can publish for offline use. We don't use this much anymore, but it allows you to publish in such a way that you could mount this course on a CD-ROM or a USB stick and be able to send that to someone who didn't have network access. I can publish for the web. Now, there's a difference between publishing for the web and publishing to an LMS. When you publish to a web, there is no LMS. So a lot of the features that are really powerful from our online training world aren't activated when you publish to the web. When I publish it to CourseMill, that means that I'm publishing all of the communication protocols that allow CourseMill and the course to communicate once that course has been launched by a user. We know who the user is, what day and time they started, where they left off, where they resumed, what questions they've answered. We're able to communicate all that information back and forth between the course and the LMS. The remaining 4 items that you see up here are for indirect publishing to an LMS. AICC is the original protocol for online training. This was developed by the Aircraft Industries Consortium back in early 2000s sometime. It eventually evolved into SCORM, which is scalable content object reusable modules. And these are the most common forms of course packaging that are available today or used today. In most LMSs support SCORM. There's different versions of SCORM, however, and we'll look at how we set that in Lectora here in just a moment. XAPI, which I've learned is pronounced Zappy. The key is the API. Basically, SCORM functions at a course level. We know that you started a course, you're engaged in a course, you finished a course, you passed a course, you got 100 on a course. But if there's content within that course, such as video or animations or documents or some kind of simulation, we don't really have a lot of insight into that via SCORM, and that's where XAPI comes in. XAPI allows you to record and track individual learning objects that are embedded within a course. So if a user watches a video, I make a record of that, and that gets communicated back to the LMS. So in 90 days, I'm looking for somebody who has skills and they've watched risk management video. This person has done that, and we can see that at the atomic level. Scorm is a little bit larger at we'll call it the molecule. I don't know. I just make this stuff up. All right. So XAPI and XAPI, or ZAPI CM5, which simply extends the ZAPI protocols to give you additional information about the user and the learning path that they're on. What's important here is these bottom four are indirect publishing methods. When you publish in these forms, you're generating a package file, a zip file that you would upload to the LMS, whether it's CourseMill or Rockstar Learning Platform, whatever the case happens to be. We'll take a look here in a couple minutes at the Lectora Online, and we'll see that we've actually got a number of other LMSs that we support from our online version of Lectora. So anyway, with all of that said, what I'm going to do is to publish directly to CourseMill. Okay, so I select CourseMill, and it immediately pops up the publishing editor. And as you're publishing all of there's a lot of messaging that happens in this window, and you'll see it scroll off screen, but you can retrieve it because we add scroll bars to it. If you have any errors or issues with your course that make it problematic for publishing, you have two different things to look for: errors, which means that this is not going to work, or you have messages or alerts that kind of tell you, hey, you've got a button that points at something that's really not there. It doesn't stop its operation. You can still publish it and use it as you need, but you need to be aware that it's there. Whereas a red error says there's a problem with your course. It's not going to run the way that you expect. It may not run at all. So we'll come back and address some of those here a little bit later. Okay, so once I do that, and I want to just kind of keep track with my my presentation. So the act of publishing, guess what? We're getting into imperative mode. Let's just do it. You go out, you click publish, and I want to point one little thing out. Because I selected CourseMill, you'll notice the icon up here is now a CourseMill icon. If I had selected review link, you see here that this icon changes, and the same thing is true over here on the ribbon. So this tells you I can just click on that button, or I can use the drop down, and of course I have to close this first, or I can just use the drop down and select the target from there. Once I've done that, I just click the button from that point on. I don't have to reselect it. So one time only. All right, so I've got this course ready, so I'm going to click publish. Now, normally this field here is going to be blank the very first time you do it, because the system doesn't know what course ID is for that course. What's important for you is that the course ID has to match the course ID of the target course profile that you've created. And as you can see here, it's VC 2022-3 is the one that we're going to be using. So I just type that in, or if I use the magical paste key, and I'll put it back in. Imagine that I actually use the keyboard to do that. So we've got our course ID. You'll see that the system by default has pulled from your preferences, your Lectora profile has pulled your default instructor credentials. That's the ID and the password. If you need to change something, if I need to use a different password or a different user, I can do that where I just simply type over that. Or I could even go into my account settings, which you see here pops up the preferences, takes me directly to my settings for CourseMill, and I can make those changes globally. it's not, that's a decision for you. What I'm going to do is continue to use Twigs as my instructor with the appropriate password. Okay. Now, all I have to do now technically is click OK. You'll see that it validates everything. And I actually ran this twice last night to make sure I didn't have any errors. So I'm hoping, there was a blue message there. I don't know if you guys saw it or not. But what it tells me, there are no errors, but there is a warning. And I can scroll back up through here and I can see the entire build process, what I've added, what buttons are being used, what images are being inserted, all of that. And I'm just going to scroll back up here just briefly because I'm curious to see what that warning message was. And I have a next page action. That is an action that says go to the next page, that has a page that it can't go to. So we'll come back and fix that here a little bit later. What's important though is now that I've built this, all I have to do is send it. Okay, so I publish it, then I send it, and it copies that file up there. It tells me that I've successfully completed the import of that package, because not only does it get copied, it then has to be processed. And it goes up as a zip file, and then it gets unzipped, and all of that data gets written into a directory somewhere out on the LMS, and it reads in a special file known as the manifest file. And the manifest file tells the LMS all about the course, what images are there, what HTML pages are there, where to start. It's got all of the coding necessary for it to talk back and forth with the LMS. All of that has been inserted in. Now it's been uploaded, and then it's been unpacked directly into CourseMill. So if we switch our views momentarily, now you'll notice this hasn't updated. Well, let's fix that. Let's update it. So I'm going to do it this, I select the course, I select content, and now you'll see that I have a launch icon. I have a profile for the course content, which was created by reading that manifest file that we spoke about. And if I don't like it when I'm done, I can always delete it. So what I want to do now, obviously, is I want to test it. But let's go back and just make sure that I haven't left anything out. So I can say I'm done. I'm done with it. Okay. We'll come back and do some testing here in a moment. I want to, before we go too much further, I just want to point out that these are the things that you have to provide to Lectora in order to do your publishing. You've got to have the course ID, the instructor ID, and the instructor password. You can pull the instructor credentials from your profile, your preferences that you specified, or you can override them and use a different set of credentials. You may have different instructor IDs for different courses. As an instructional designer, it's not an uncommon thing. Once you have the course ID, that's everything that you need. There are, however, two other panels that we want to look at in our publishing that relate directly to the LMS. The first one is called SCORM options, and here we provide information about the LMS and information about the course. So when we come back here to our publishing, and we're just going to republish this, that'll bring up the dialogue. So the first thing that we look at here in SCORM options is when one of the requirements for having a SCORM compliant course is you have to declare what's called an AU or an assignable unit. That language actually comes to us from AICC, from that original protocol back in year 2000, 2001. This is what identifies your course's content uniquely to the LMS. The second thing you need is to have a graded test in your course. And so, but it's not, when you add a graded test, you have the option of recording only the final score, or you can record the answers to the individual questions. So in my sample course here, I actually have 4 questions, and I'm asking the LMS to go ahead and record my response to each of those 4 questions. And that's what this first checkbox here is all about. The published course will report the test or any survey question interaction to the LMS. If you don't check that box, you get a final score. I passed this with 80%, or I didn't pass it with 60%. That's the only information you get. So this extends the ability to learn and about how your users are interacting with your content. It also gives management a way to see where are the weaknesses that I need to address. As an instructional designer, it helps me look at, well, how effective is my questioning? Because I can capture that information and store it directly into the database. The second thing that I just want to point out under the LMS side is that you can prompt the user to restart a course. So if I leave a course midstream and I come back tomorrow or the day after, the course remembers that I left off on panel 5. And I have the option of either restarting the course from the very beginning or picking up where I left off. And by checking this box, we prompt the user. Do you want to start over again, or do you want to pick up where you left off? If you don't check this box, then the system assumes you're starting over every time that you come in. The second piece of information that we add on this field here is metadata. You'll see we've got, if my name was added in Lectora properly, it would show up here as course creator. You'll see the course ID, the course title. This is just the name of the file that we've uploaded, but I can add things like keywords and tags and things like that as well to make the course more easy to locate in a search or those kinds of things. All right. The second thing that we want to look at are the HTML properties. If you have a really large course, first of all, this first set of properties here for publish, I'm going to publish to a local file on my desktop, and then that data is going to be zipped up and packaged, and that's what gets uploaded to CourseMill. If I decide to publish with one of the alternate indirect methods, scorm, AICC, Zappy, or what have you, then that output is created and is stored in that folder, and that's where I have to go to do any manual uploads to the system. More importantly, I mean, this obviously is important from a tracking perspective, right? You need to know where your content is. But more importantly, if I have a really large course and I've only, I've got 100 panels that I've created, but I've only modified 2 or 3 of them, I don't want to go through and republish everything. So I can set it up so that I publish only those pages that I've updated. Okay, so very, very useful. It can increase your publishing time, your compile time, to very, very fast. By default, we usually publish all pages, and in a course of this size, it really doesn't have an impact. But you do have some additional options that you can select here. I usually just accept all the defaults. Lightbox pop-ups, create alt tags for images so that or buttons, when I drag my cursor over them, I get a little pop-up panel that tells me the name of the object. I can convert page names from their long name, as you see over here, to a very short ID page. And there's times where you want to do that, particularly if you're creating and publishing content for others outside of your organization. And then finally, publish for seamless play. This is an architecture that we have in Lectora that allows movies and audios and animations to run quickly and smoothly with minimal intervention on your part. So I just wanted to kind of point those things out. What's really key here, of course, are these three fields for setting up your publishing. All right, really quick here. Let's see, where are we in our presentation? We've talked about the HTML, the setting the destinations, looking at other desktop and mobile options. I left that one piece out, but you can publish your course so that it specifically scales to the footprint of a mobile device. What's that, like 3.5 inches by 5 inches, up to 7 by 4, whatever. You can force the publishing in that fashion. We send it. We've already done that. And all we had to do was click send project. So we published it, we sent it, and the next thing to do, of course, is to test it. And so let's pop back over here to CourseMill. And all I have to do to test it is, I've already had this window open. Of course, you would just simply come in, you would search on the course, you would locate it, and then click on content, and then click this launch icon on the content. So this launches the course. It's a scalable content object now, and it will run from the beginning to the end. The only thing that it doesn't do is talk to the LMS with things like completions and resumes and suspend data and whatever. I'm just basically running it in a test environment, a sandbox, however you want to think, a staging environment. It doesn't actually record any of my scores or any of my interactions. So this gives you a way to test it and see what it actually looks like online. And when we do that, look at that. There's my course. Here's where we've gone so far. We've answered a lot of these questions along the way. We've learned how to get started by creating an instructor and a course profile, associating the instructor to that course profile. As you see here, we've set up our Lectora preferences. We used the URL, we've set the path to /CM, and we've then gone out and walked through the publishing it, the options that we need. And the reason I'm going through all of this, repetition is a good way to learn, but more importantly, I'm trying to get to the really exciting part, which is my quiz. Not really. As you can see, I'm quite a poet. Roses are red, violets are blue, grass is green, and dirt is brown. Okay, that's it. That's it. Not only am I a poet, but you've gone through my sample exam. And I'm doing this we're going to go back and look at some of these components here momentarily, but you'll see that I've passed it and I've gotten all the way to the end and I reached the panel for success. And all I have to do now is to click on the exit button and it closes. So I now know that my course is fully functional. So, all right, I hope you guys have found this to be as exciting as I have. Let me pause, take a breath, give your ears a rest. Do we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, we do have one question. Will the conform to mobile device in Lectora only work if the layout in Lectora is set up?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
you want to do the responsive design. Excuse me, I get all choked up thinking about this. You'll do the responsive design in Lectora. So I would add this to that. And then when I do my publishing, it targets it specifically that way to a mobile device. Now, if there's anything more that you need to know about that, let me know offline and I'll hook you up with a true Lectora expert. I'm just kind of a casual user who's had a lot of experience, but I'm not the expert. So if there's more to that, let me know and I'll be happy to help you get that info.
Okay, thank you, John. And
All
then
right.
can you publish XAPI to CourseMill? Is CourseMill
The
XAPI compliant?
Today, no. CourseMill only supports scorm 1.2. And we're, I kept saying that I was going to go over that here. And so what we'll do is by default, we're publishing out to scorm 1.2. And that's what CourseMill supports today. It does have support for AICC content, and there are times and places where that is extremely useful, but 98% of all of our content is scorm 1.2.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Those
You
are
bet.
all the questions we have right now.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's take a look at a couple of these questions that we started with here at the beginning. We said that there's numerous publishing options in Lectora. How do I select the best one? Well, again, that really depends on what you're trying to do. The answer is if you can publish directly, you should. It just makes it that much faster and that much more direct. Let's take a quick look here at Lectora Online at the publishing options that we see here. And I've got the same course, the same content now up on Lectora Online. And when we go to publish, you'll see that we have support for some additional LMSs and additional protocols as well. Here you'll see that we support Docebo, SumTotal, Price Waterhouse, Saba. In addition, these are all, very popular LMSs that you can do a similar thing with. So everything that you've seen us do in CourseMill, you could do with those additional LMSs. We also give you the ability, as you saw, to publish to ReviewLink, but we also now have support for the Rockstar Learning platform. And we also have the ability to publish to the Training Arcade, so you can embed content into some of your gaming platforms. So that's really the key. When we select SCORM, we have to select what level of SCORM are we publishing to. By default, it's SCORM 1.2, but you'll see here on the SCORM options, I'm just showing it to you from LO, it's a little more obvious. You can select either 1.2 or 2004. Our RLP product supports 2004 as well as 1.2. So very, very useful set of tools. Publishing from Lectora Online is no different than publishing from Lectora Desktop. Conceptually, things may look a little bit different. For when I go to set up my preferences in Lectora Online, I don't see something called CourseMill here, but I do see something called apps. So when I click on apps, you'll see that you can configure credentialing for the various apps that you would be publishing to, including CourseMill, ReviewLink, the arcades, the Training Arcade, Rockstar Learning, and Docebo. When you set up your CourseMill information, you'll notice that we don't have to use the https:// You can just put the domain name and the path, which is almost always /cm. And something that I didn't point out when we were looking at desktop is you can test your connection. And it basically just reaches out and says, hey, are you there? Does this path exist? And the system comes back and says, sure, I do. So fantastic. When you do that from desktop, it also looks to see if your instructor credentials are valid. So there is an additional step there. But once you set this up, all you have to do is save it. And when it comes time to publish, Now, what I want you to notice here is published from Lectora Online. I added that there because I wanted you to be able to tell the difference between that and what we, whoops, I got to open the right application here. I'm sorry. I am in my browser. I just got to go to the right place. Let me rephrase that. Thank you. You'll notice that when I play this here, there is no published from Lectora Online. So we know that that we have indeed not used smoke and mirrors, but have actually done the real publishing from Lectora Online. So let me go back to my Lectora installation here. And to do this publishing, I simply imported this as a package file and added this one additional piece of information. So now I'm going to go out and I'm going to publish to CourseMill. And you'll see here that because I had already tested it to make sure it worked, it has my course ID, but normally I would have to type that in. It remembers the fact that I signed in as Mrs. Twiggs, but you'll notice there was no place in our preferences for online to store instructor information. So this is manually entered each time. And let's hope I remember Mrs. Twiggs's login. And that doesn't look right. That looks a little better. I just do it by the number of dots. And here I have access to my SCORM options, just like we saw before, down on the desktop. And I also have my HTML options. Again, they're laid out a little bit differently, but everything is there that you need, including scaling your mobile content. So at this point, I just click OK. It goes off and does its publishing. So publish it. It's almost done. You'll see that it's adding in all of these different views for the different responsive resolutions that we've set. And now it says, okay, we're done. Successfully, 0 errors, 0 warnings. The key here is send it. My very first presentation on doing this was to a client, and I got through the compile and the publish. I didn't know what to do. And it's like, oh, so I had to switch over to desktop. But the key is don't make that mistake. Just you publish it, you send it, and then you test it. So now I'm done. And if we come back here to, oops, I don't have to close that because it's my browser. When I come back here to my active screen, couple of things, you'll notice the timestamp has changed. And when I launch it, you'll see that, let's open this up. It's now been published from Lectora Online. So the processes are so close that there's no noticeable difference. All right. Well, I thank you all for letting me come in. There's one last thing that I want to kind of talk about, and that is what elements must be in my course before I publish. And there's really 3 things that I want to point out. In order to publish as a SCORM compliant course to CourseMill, you must have an AU. And AU stands for Assignable Unit. It comes to us, like I said, from the original AICC, Aircraft Industry Consortium specification for online learning. And you simply, to add an AU, you just simply click on it. And you'll see here, now I've already got one in there, so it added a second one. I don't need that, but I do need it initially. So what I'm going to do is just delete the one that I added. And it will automatically insert it at wherever you've located your cursor. Okay, so if I have my cursor up here and I add an AU, it'll look at all the front matter, my fonts, my navigation, and it'll put it directly below it where it belongs. And then you see all of my content is now part of that AU. When we look at the AU specifically, you'll notice here that it's given an ID. You can set this ID from the very beginning, or you can just accept the default. And about 90% of the courses that I see in CourseMill all just accept the default. You can get more precise and, call it risk management or, compliance 101, whatever you want to call it. But once you do that and publish the course, be very cautious about changing it. Because it gets added to the manifest file, and the manifest file gets read and used to build the content profile. So everything associated to that course is now associated based on that ID, but only within the course. So be cautious and not change it, because it can create situations where you can have an effect on your student records, and things like that. So that's the first thing that I want to point out about the AU. The second thing about the AU is you can get as descriptive as you want, and this is a sample Lectora training for the user conference. Okay, and don't mind my spelling if it's good or bad, either way. There we go. Okay, so sample Lectora training. I'm sorry, I have to be a little more precise. There we go. All right, what's mostly important here is the mastery score. You remember I had a sample quiz, which was really a poetry lesson. And in there, in order to pass that exam, you had to get 3 out of 4 answers correct, or 75%. So it's this is critical for us to keep in mind, because if I only have a sample exam, it applies against that exam. But I may have knowledge checks peppered throughout my course, in which case those get included as part of that overall assessment. Now, there are parameters that you can set to turn that kind of stuff off or on, but just please be aware that there's 2 different places you set a passing score. The first is on the AU. The second is on the quiz itself. And when you set up the quiz, you set up, so you'll notice I'm just clicking through each of the tabs associated to the test. And you'll see here that you have properties, behavior, and results. On the results tab, you can have a different setting for whether or not that passes. If you pass the test, what the passing score for that test is. They can be different things. I can have multiple quizzes. Excuse me, I can have multiple quizzes in my course, and have one requires 90, another requires 80, and have a couple of knowledge checks that collectively equal 75%. That still allows me to complete the module. So if you don't have an AU or you don't have a quiz, then you do get an error when you're compiling or publishing your course. Okay. The last thing that I want to point out, and then I'll turn it back over. Actually, I have 2 things. The first is you must have a declared exit condition for your course. So what that means is I usually add an exit button. Now, it can be any button you want, any shape, size, or color, but you want to make sure that there is an associated action, an event that's associated to it called on close exit. All right. This is very important for SCORM because this tells the course when it's ready to send all of the information that it's gathered about your performance and interaction with the content. It tells the system to send all of that back to the LMS. And so if you ever get an error that says you have to have a defined on-exit close, that's what it's telling you. So I usually just add a button here, whether it's, in this case, it's global, it's everywhere, or I could add a button to a particular page. For example, here on the past page, I could make this the button. Right? It's not, but I could. But as long as I have an associated on-exit close, you've hit the three things that you have to have in your course. You have to have an AU, you have to have a graded exam, and you have to have a defined on-exit and close. So I've got 2 more minutes. And I really thank you all for letting me share my afternoon with you, and for you taking the time to learn more about CourseMill and Lectora. Thanks very much, everyone.